so I do it in my spare time. I do not do it for a full day job. And so I've actually got a few things to talk about today. The first one's going to be me and some of the apps that I've come up with, some of the things that I've learned. Quick question actually, by show of hands, who's got an app in the marketplace at the moment? Pretty much everybody, so I apologise to you guys, it might be a little, the first few slides might be a little bit taking the mick. I'm then going to talk to you about an open source logging tool which I've come up with. I'm trying to sort of share around and see who's interested. Sorry Taylor if I'm not trying to compete, it's okay. And then I'm going to talk to you about a website that I'm familiar with, which is WPCentral. So we'll start with me. And as you can see, I had a bit of fun with PowerPoint when I started doing this because I hate my day job and this is much more interesting. So, my name's Jay, I'm a pretty young developer. I've been doing this now for, coming up a year and a half. In fact, my most popular app is about to hit its year birthday. I basically hate presentations, so this is going to be a talk, not a presentation. If you want to interrupt me and ask me a question, just go ahead. I'm not going to have a go at that. Let's talk a little bit about the stuff that I've done. We'll start off with my first app, which is Rate Your Beer over there. Rate Your Beer was something that came out of Rate Your Beer came out of a bit of fun that we had with some students coming up with a beer rating website. It was originally supposed to be a nice serious project for university, and as you can imagine, students, we just went down the alcoholic route as sort of more often than what we do. So we created a website, and then I sort of thought, let's give it a try and make it turn into an app. You may also know me from Windows Phone Central, windowsphoneCentral.com. Rich is also here and sitting around, we'll come back in a bit later on, and the overall Arching Mobile Nations group. So we'll start with Rate Your Beer. Rate Your Beer was first released, I think it was about a year and a half ago now, and it looked nothing like that when it started. It looked pretty awful. It's one of the things that you find as you start doing Windows Phone development, that the first time you try and do a user experience, it never comes out quite how you intended it to look. And I'm probably guessing, especially the Pepper guys, who I know has put a lot of time into your app and the UI, you fully understand this. But it's a simple app, it's in the marketplace right now. If you feel like rating the beer that you might be drinking later on, I encourage you to go out and give it a shot. You have the home screen, which is just showing you the latest 6 beers that have come through. You swipe across and you've got the catalogue, which is just using a long list selector. I don't do this with Telerik tools or anything like that, I apologise, it's all very open and what that is provided. And then we have a search screen, which I decided was a pretty important thing to add into there. It's a really simple application. It's something which was basically me having a go at using some web technologies, trying to come up with some interfaces, and when you get to the server side yourself, you sort of get a hand for how you're going to start providing data to your apps. I then put in quite recently, or quite late towards development, an updates page. This is something I did want to share. When you're creating your app, users love to give you feedback when they don't have any, because they don't have any concept as to what's going on in the background. So this actually started out on a bedroom server, and every time the server went down, I get people saying, "Oh, your app's not working." And I quickly realised that if you just put a link to Twitter on there saying, "Sorry, the server's down," give us like a few seconds, and people get much more happy. So the biggest thing I can encourage is if you can find some way to send out just communications, notifications to your users, they appreciate it big time. Go back to the home screen. So yeah, Rate Your Beer, completely free, never going to make any money out of it. It was just something that I did for a bit of fun. I always forgot the actual beer rating screen. A little bit of information as to what's been given. Users can upload ABV, the description of the beer, and ultimately rate it. And again, that's a custom written read. I feel really bad now that you've already done this presentation because it's just going to look like I've ripped it off, but I was around first. And then you tap the options, and of course it's completely dynamic. That's the sort of thing that matters. My second app never made it to marketplace because it was it technically started before Rate Your Beer, but I didn't actually do anything on it. And it was a scheduling app made for my university. This is actually what I did to finish my computer science degree. And the principle around it was that I wrote an entire, a full Spring-managed Java web interface with a modem attached to it, so that it was a scheduling and notification system. The idea being that lecturers owned lectures, students would then sign up to their lectures, and lecturers could basically text in cancellation notifications or room change notifications to the system, and that would send out text notifications, email notifications, or updates on the app. There was a website as well, but it wasn't very good. So the app just turned out to be something which was me playing around with controls, and I'm still getting to know the system at this point. Actually, I haven't seen this happen sometimes before I put this presentation on there. It's been buried in my hard drive somewhere. But it was quite an interesting thing to learn about, trying to move away from data binding controls in some areas and try to have some dynamic UI. That calendar, as there was no convenient calendar control. Actually, do you have a calendar control? Is that something you know? So I should have used that. but that ended up being something that I dynamically created on load. Not particularly well done, but it did the job. And then you had an option to view your week and you could swipe on through. So they were my first apps. What did I learn? And this is where it's addressed to people who might not have an app in the marketplace yet. Dear God, start an expression blend, because otherwise it's just hideous the first time you try and deal with XML. And expression blend actually gives you a really good starting point when it comes to development, because I don't know about anybody else, the first time you started with developer tools, did you know what you were doing? Did you sit there and look at it and say, oh, I don't really know how to start this project at all? And that gives you something to work off. Don't finish an expression blend, because that makes it even worse, but we'll get to that later. Keep it simple, really, really simple when it comes to most applications. You want to provide data. The whole Metro design parameter is get the presentation, get the content up and forefront. Don't bog it down in too much UI. And do write a few custom UI elements, because you won't believe how much that little learning experience will help you coming down the road when you start to learn how to create the UI yourself. Model everything, use bindings. I didn't do that the first time I tried to use Rate Your Beer, and it was very, 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 very slow. And the thing I've really learned, and Rate Your Beer is a customer of this, is a real, so look at this. Rate Your Beer is ugly as anything if you look at the back-end code. It's probably some of the worst code I've ever written in my life, but it was experimental and it taught me an awful lot. So don't worry about it being beautiful in the back end. Do worry about possibly having a couple of classes that you can pull out and try using later on. I'll come back to that a bit later. You do only have one chance for a first impression. I'm a proponent of do the basics right really well first, make everything a nice easy experience to begin with, and start adding features. If you try and do everything all at once but not do it very well, you end up with a Symbian operating system, which is unfortunately the truth of the matter. And it's the way that Apple, it's the way that Microsoft have gone as well, is to keep things, start off with a really great experience and then add things in later and do it well. And I think we should follow that when it comes to apps. Not everyone will agree with me, and that's absolutely fine. But Rate Your Beer, when it first came out, you couldn't even upload beers, you could just look at them and rate them, but it worked. People came back. As soon as I added that content, I sent out a quick group email and everyone became involved again. But that first impression is important. If the first thing your app does when someone loads it is crash, it's over. And I can point to a couple, unfortunately, that I've started out and it just hasn't worked straight away. It does need a beautiful UI. People on Windows Phone love the way the interface works, and if you come out with something which is really simple and just drab, nobody will ever come back to it. It's probably the key thing when it comes to your app. The code doesn't need to look great. The presentation, the experience that you're presenting to the user is what really matters. So what did I do next? I'm starting to build confidence at this point. I'm feeling pretty good.
I didn't realise you were going to transition.
Yeah, go for it.
Because you haven't got to the bottom of the page.
No, go for it. It's just an easy flow. That's all right. Do you want me to do a pose and smile as well? Or?
Yeah.
That's
all right. You're actually not in the picture yet.
That's all right then. It'll be a much better picture that way. That's fine. So what did I do next? So I'm building confidence. I'm feeling pretty good about my app development abilities at this point, but I run out of good ideas really, really quickly. I'm not an ideas man. Exactly. Best part of the day so far. So I took a little chance on contacting some very ugly mugs, and this is the guys from WPCentral. You've got Dan, Rich, who's you've gone over there, and George. And this is actually something I want to share, because I contacted them. I said, look, I feel like you've got a good site. I feel like I could write a good app for you. I also tried contacting Text from last night, which I was really into at the time, but after asking to see a portfolio, they weren't very impressed with Rate Your Beer. I wonder how they've got now, I don't know. And it led to a conversation with Daniel eventually about, should we start putting together an app? I agreed that I was taking all the risks, but I was also going to maintain all the publishing rights. I agreed that any revenue would be shared. I agreed that basically he didn't have to worry about it going wrong, I did. And that takes the pressure off for them, and it just makes you really worried and panicking that you've taken on too much. But it led to me sending him the very first version of the app, and if anyone wants to see it, I decided to show the first design concepts I put together, and I apologise in advance for these. But that was the first thing I made in Expression Blend. It was basically the idea of, what do we want to do here? Do we want to make an app that's going to be a really simple Windows Phone experience, or do we want to say, let's try and recreate the app but in a quick Metro environment? As anyone who's got the app on their phone will know, we did not go with one on the right, because it's, I don't know what I was thinking, but the fact of the matter is you've got to experiment, you've got to try. It quickly evolved. I think that was version version 1 or something along those lines, when we first started getting data in. It feels like an age ago now. That I think it's almost exactly a year and a bit ago that I was putting this together. In fact, you can tell it's a version didn't make it onto the marketplace because it's still got our logo. And Microsoft quickly told us that that's a Windows logo and we don't own it. And then probably put through someone who created an RSS reader that was exactly the same. I won't question Microsoft, but you tipped me off that day. We then went on to version 1.3, and the first thing that I remember saying to myself when I developed this was, I'm not going to have a settings page. I'm going to make things really simple, really fluid, and no one's going to have to worry about setting the app up. Wow, did that backlash? People effectively came straight onto to our forums, onto everything else, saying, "Oh, I want to be able to change this. I don't like that. I want to have a go with this." And the settings page is now one of the biggest pages in the entire bloody app. So, learn from my mistake there. Do give it a settings page. Give someone some configurability, otherwise they will just destroy you for it. And of course, it evolved. This is the Mango version that we first put out. And the second thing that everyone complained about was, these backgrounds are really striped. I don't like them. They don't look like Metro. Anybody who's got an app in the marketplace will know that if it's not Metro, a lot of people won't give it a look in. And that's what we came up with. Back then, horizontal scrolling was actually quite a big deal. That was what they were trying to do with the Facebook app, was horizontal. When you moved across, it was sort of accepted that you'd have things spread over 2 screens in panorama style. With Mango, things changed. Microsoft changed the music hub, as everyone who's had it since the early days, and everything went to a vertical scrolling. We fixed that later. But I was quite a fan of that look, and it was a bit of a sad thing when everyone decided they wanted to change it. And all I did learn from that is that, as much as you might think, if you can create a really cool UI, that's great, but make sure that you obey the user's custom themes and their highlight colours, because they really don't like it if it feels like you're messing up with their designs that they've set up on their phone. And it brings us to version 2, or 2.2, which is out on the marketplace. And I encourage you, please go and download it. It is there right now. I can always use more downloads. So this is the home screen. We went with possibly the simplest thing I could think of that's the bit which first matters. I talked about first impression earlier, and the home screen is the bit which is going to really make a difference. And a lot of the newsreader apps at the moment, what you'll see is just a really simple, bold headline and a few bits of text, and it's very same looking. What we wanted to do was create something that was a little bit different, and I feel like we did it. I feel like what we did was put in a condensed version of viewing a website on your phone. The actual fading the images into the text was an idea I had later on to try and keep those values exactly set. Another thing to learn, if you set minimum width values and minimum height values in a list scroller, things jump because it loads in and the list box just can't deal with it, so use fixed UI if you can. It was something unique. As you can see when you swipe over, you now have a tile style view. We started bringing in, again, podcasts wasn't in there in the first version. The wallpaper section is brand new, to version 2 at least. And we keep adding features and people are really positive to it. I think the first time we added comments into the app, we then got about 250 comments telling us how happy we were that we added comments into the app, which is always great to be able to do. And then, of course, we had the search. Again, it's all about keeping it simple. The Metro principles are present your content, make things really obvious and simple to the user, and that is what we did. We came up with, okay, all the information we want to see is a bit of information about the article. What you can see is the text. Eventually we tried to put in a pinch to zoom in the text, but apparently people don't understand gestures as much as we think they do. They really get lost, so you've either got to present them with a help screen to begin with, saying, do this gesture to perform this operation, or make it really obvious. We went down the obvious route in the end and put in a feature to bulk up the fonts. But that's really important actually. It's really important, if you're going to use tap to hold as well, make sure it's advertised that it's tap to hold, because users don't get it, that all gets buried in the application and it's not very clear. It's the same for the OS, unfortunately. I bought my sister one of these phones. When I introduced her to the tap to hold, she discovered about half the phone's functionality over again. So I advise against doing it in apps, as much as it pains me. We have, of course, the comments section. That's a screenshot from version 2.2, and we tried to imitate the messaging screen as best we could. That's difficult, as it turns out. No one actually told me in Expression Blend there is a comments control, so I painstakingly wrote that using stat panels, wrappers, and a really careful vector. I think it looks better. I don't have a comment one, it's too chunky. I'm just going to put it out there. But then again,
when you say there's a comments one, you know what you're talking about?
Yeah, the UI one that's really obvious.